Thank you, Professor Kanak Shavapatraji, my esteemed colleagues of the Indian Council for Social Science Research. At the very outset, I would like to express my thankfulness to Member Secretary Professor Malhotra for organizing this show in a very short notice. And in a very short notice also, he requested me to prepare a paper for presentation. And after having heard from Professor Amita Singh on the transdisciplinary research and this need for it in social science, I think I don't have much to add on to whatever he has said. And because you're supposed to hear from Niti Aayog member, Professor Abroy, he couldn't turn up, so I'm kind of substitute. I was supposed to speak in the second session. And as the time permits, I'd like to really highlight some of these broader changes that you find in Indian foreign policy in the last, say, 5 years. To begin with, as a student of social science, how do I look at foreign policy analysis? Foreign policy analysis, or FPA, for a decade and a half back, emerged as a sub-discipline within international relation discipline. And as a sub-discipline, foreign policy analysis is interdisciplinary par excellence. And foreign policy analysis involves all aspects of social science disciplines, right from sociology to psychology and anthropology. So that underlines the saliency of studying foreign policy analysis of not simply the bigger country, bigger players, also the middle and the small powers. And second, general understanding of foreign policy is basically the way a state conducts externally a relation with other states. Or some would define with generic terms, foreign policy of a given country or the state is the sum total of its bilateral and multilateral ties, or its certain position in the multilateral fora, such as signatory to certain set of protocols or the international agreements. I would like to argue here that foreign policy of a country is more than that. First of all, it represents the country's image. One, it constitutes the country's image and identity as well. So foreign policy in a way of a country is a constitutive of its own identity externally. Second, foreign policy of a country is not only aimed at ensuring the physical survival of a sovereign state, that is the territorial sovereignty, it also secures the ontological security of a state. And what does it mean? Broadly, it refers to the inner condition of being at peace with oneself. And when one finds himself or herself at being peace, only when the core values or the moral basis of the individuals are secured. In other words, ontological security refers to a set of values and the cultural moorings of a state, which need to be secured through your foreign policy conduct. Third, foreign policy also is the medium and the means of projection of a country's power. And many people get confused when we use the concept of power. Many times, very liberally, generously, it is used. Power in international relation simply doesn't refer to the coercive power or power through inducement. Power doesn't mean the possession of certain capabilities by a state. And power is function of those capabilities, true. But then power is something which is performative trait. Power cannot be measured unless until it is exercised. So power has to measure in terms of the impact and influence it has. So how do you then measure power? Power has to measure in terms of what a state possesses, number one. Number two, whether the state has the willingness to use this power. Number three, where the power is used, how the recipient feel about the power. Whether it changes the attitude, the behavior, orientation of the state on which the power is exercised or not. So when you say country is powerful, then I would like to actually boil it down to three aspects of it. That is what I call 3 P's. Possession of a set of capabilities. Number 2, projection of those capabilities. That means transforming those capability into capacity and making it the instrument in the foreign policy initiative to achieve a set of goals. And third is perception by others of the power holder. That's very important. If the power is exercised to change others' attitude and behavior, and others feel that you have the power, you're going to use it, then that country is considered as powerful. So 3 P's are important indices in terms of assessing a country whether it is powerful or not. Third, foreign policy is something what I call the bridging discipline. It connects between the macro politics of the interstate system on the one side and things happen within the state on the other. The socio-economic developments or the political process unfold within the state influence the international system macro politics as much as the macro politics influences the micro politics within the state. So the foreign policy behavior of a state is influenced, to begin with, is a response to the international system that throws up opportunity challenges, and the response is shaped by the peculiar characteristic of the political system, its economic base, and above all, idiosyncrasies of the leaders. So the foreign policy analysis has to be done in terms of framing a response to these challenges and the opportunities thrown by the changing international system, and the response is framed by 3 major factors: the material base, that's economic base; number 2, the military infrastructure; and number 3, extremely important, that is what I call essential factor. The structural factors per se cannot explain a specific kind of foreign policy response, a specific challenge, opportunity provided by international system, unless you take into account the essential factor that refers to leadership quality and the skills. Whether the leader of the country is a visionary, dynamic, or has a set of goals to achieve, these things equally count in terms of assessing the foreign policy success of a country. Within the broad framework, very briefly, if we try to assess the foreign policy of a country in the last 5 years, first you have to take into account the international system. The international system, since the end of the Cold War, has moved from bipolarity to virtual unipolarity, and from 2007 onwards, since the financial maelstrom, this phase has been characterized as the power transition. Power transition is a peculiar spell of the phase in international politics at a time when the rising power, rising power, basically power which is asserting itself for a place at the center and contesting the hegemonic power represented by the United States of America. So you have a kind of contestation between a challenger represented by China with its own Sinocentric global order, which is its own vision of establishing or reclaiming the space where the Chinese had in the 19th century before, and creating a system of tributary and the vassal states with China at the center, and challenging whom? The United States of America through its so-called Asian dream. So if historically, whenever you have a period of power transition, most of the time it has turned out to be quite chaotic and violent. There is a possibility of that confrontation not being averted in future. So in that situation, when the international system has undergone a change from a peaceful transformation or the systemic transformation from bipolarity to unipolarity towards a power transition period, which is quite chaotic, the other states try to adjust themselves to a situation which is unpredictable, a system which is in a state of flux. So this state of international system offers countries like India, which are middle power, aspiring power, space to assert themselves, to have their own bilateral ties, to have their own multilateral congregations or formation. But at the same time, it also pushes the country like India to align itself with either the rising hegemon or the established hegemon, either with the US or with China. So in that circumstances, this is the huge foreign policy challenge for a country like India to cope with it. So when you look at these changes, at least since 2007 onwards, you have the government led by UPA. The rise of China became or increasingly became pronounced from 2006 onwards and quite evident visually from 2007 at a time when they entered Western countries passing through a serious financial crisis, and China could mobilize its wealth towards the military build-up, to the modernization of the army. And all of you are more or less familiar with the Chinese policy in South Asia, the string of pearls, the encirclement policy, all that it started. And the American discourse in that time, and the Western discourse in that period of time was, China was no longer considered a peaceful rising power. And the look towards India, by terming India as a rising power or aspiring power for the great power status. And unfortunately, because of the last NDA government defeat based on the so-called Signing India campaign, the Indian policy-making establishment had the aversion to this kind of categorization or the kind of what I call the stump or the kind of image of India externally, that India is a rising power. So Indian policymakers until 2013 decidedly shied away from any kind of talk regarding India as a rising power. Here is the country, America, Britain, and they are all prepared to accept India as a rising power. And we had the problem accepting this. The people are trying to certify us a rising power, had all the potential to become an ascendant power to contest China, but we have difficulty accepting that. And instead, it was considered as a kind of Western construct. It was considered a Western trap, a long rope given to India to hang itself. But that shows a hesitation on part of Indian policymakers to take up the challenge, because if we accept the rising power status, obviously it brings in a set of responsibility to behave as a rising power, to become a rule maker rather than simply a rule follower. An entire period until 2013, you read the literature, India was the only would-be ascendant power which was resisting its own rise, which was resistant to its own rise. It is only the policymakers had difficulty accepting India as an aspiring power, as ascendant power, a rising power like China, because the Americans already had realized the rise of China is going to be a serious problem to international order based on the Western set of rules and institutions and principles. But India, rising status would not pose similar challenge to the Western ideas and institutions. So this, in a way, India was considered at that time as a status inconsistent power. It means that's a discrepancy between its self-perception as power in terms of its accomplishment, achievement, and potential to achieve on the one side, and what others and its ascribed status. So you have a discrepancy. That is what had led to labeling India as a status inconsistent power. So that is, and when I try to find out what was the problem, why this hesitation on part of the Indian policymakers, see, there was no response. You go to the literature, admitting publicly, oh, China is 5 times greater than us. We are nowhere near China. Means accepting the defeat before you pick up the cudgels, before you really confront the challenge. That has not been part of our tradition. That you run away from the battlefield. It never happened historically. That shows the weak leadership. And 10 long years after this signing of this great, much talked about Sweden nuclear deal in 2005. And second reason could be that time the UPA government was more internally focused. It had no time to think about what is the India's future, how best you could cope with the challenges emanating from a neighbor which is emerging superpower, a neighbor with whom you fought war and lost in 1962. There was no planning, except your willingness to accept the suzerainty of China and doing nothing or doing precious little to contain the growing Chinese influence, whether it is Asia Pacific, now the Americans called it Indo-Pacific, or Central Asia through SCO, or in South Asia. Your economic growth was there, but there was no corresponding political growth in a neighboring country like Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. Your influence was waning, on decline. So that is a situation where you had the NDA, formation of the NDA government. In just less than six months, you had a visionary prime minister who had the guts to stand up with great resolutiveness. Yes, we are a great power. We will accept the challenges. We are prepared to accept or carry or discharge responsibilities which come with this kind of the status. And long 3 years, earlier India was considered or declared as a swing state, a balancer. Some people say we are moving away from the policy of the non-alignment. Non-alignment was the product of a given period. We decidedly tried to get out of the European civility, a real typical Indian moral politic, and moved to the macho politic. We refused to become simply a balancer. We tried to create the space for ourselves, first to retain our strategic autonomy on the one hand, and second time to maximize our influence in Indo-Pacific and managing our conflictual relation with the South Asian region, South Asian neighbor as well. But that is one aspect of it. When you try to assess the foreign policy of a given state, my take on this issue is quite different. You have to take three broader criteria or parameters. The three legs of foreign policy. One, the military infrastructure. Second, the material or the economic base. And third, your cultural products. Your cultural products and the values which is known as the soft power, which attracts others. Which attracts others, not instrumentality of power. Basically, when others are attracted automatically, it is basically guided with the logic of appropriateness. They find that your values, your cultural products are equally appropriate for the countries to follow it. So, in that situation, if you look at India, either in the category of military infrastructure, until 2018, India two governments signed 113 different deals, including 18,000 what I call jacket, which was done 6 years back for the military personnel, which was not delivered. Then we had 11 such different deals in 2000 until 2018 December. So total comes to 131 defense deals. The purpose was to establish to consolidate your military preparedness, the defense capability. India, look at the BBC, it says, India, the rising space power. There's an acknowledgement of India's capability to dominate the space research. Or whether it is ICBM, the intercontinental ballistic missiles, or it is achieving the nuclear triad, for example, with Arihant being operational or commissioned. So if you study this entire military aspect of it, you find where we're moved from not doing anything to establish a credible military base for the purpose of deterrence. In addition to this, look at this government investment in infrastructure development in Northeast. Why it has made Chinese nervous? Because the 4 bridges that India government built in record time across the Mohapatra River, connecting to right to Arunachal Pradesh to facilitate the easy mobility or mobilization of the military hardware from north to the Chinese border. Then you come to this diplomatic field. India today is being wooed by different countries. America needs India more than India needs United States of America, regardless of unpredictable nature of President Trump. So the reason is the Americans have realized that their global power is on decline. They need India, because India is the only country in Asia which can be put up as a credible counterweight to contain the growing influence of China, whether it is South China Sea, East China, Central Asia, or South Asia. So, in a way, India has to diplomatically play in such a way, adroitly, skillfully, to find its space, not being aligned closely with either America or with China. And how best it does it, it remains a huge, huge challenge for the Indian policymakers. I do admit it. But then, whatever little has been achieved, despite the kind of challenges facing this government, I think is no mean achievement as compared to the last 10 years. And finally, when you talk about India's policy or India's aspiration for an ascendant power or a great power, big power, here the first thing that India aspires for it, unlike China, is a leading player which would have useful contribution to the formulation of policy to guide the international community behavior. Rather than at the receiving end all the time, it will become an active player in contributing the policy formulation on all the issues affecting the international community. Number two, India doesn't eye on others' territory. That's very important. Unlike China, India has been projecting itself as the Jagat Guru. This basically taking back India's status position globally in the ancient period of time. India is the disseminator of knowledge, disseminator of morality and ethics in day-to-day life. This is supplemented by, again I say, by its show of hard power as means of deterrence. All through that you find for last 10 years, the policy of restraint vis-a-vis cross-border terror. This government has broken this policy of restraint towards effective balance against cross-border terror. It is difficult to say at the moment whether Indian policymaker can sustain this kind of policy against terror, and it is well proved by the preemptive strike, or what I call the surgical strike against on the terror basis across the border in Pakistan. Here I would like to add here as a footnote. Often here in the TV debate, people asking questions, doubting also how many people were killed. For as a policy analyst, we are less concerned about the casualties. We are concerned with the very policy measures undertaken by the government, which for the first time called the nuclear bluff of Pakistan. That's very important. For the first time, it's exposed the limits of Pakistan in nuclear blackmailing, right, for the Kargil episode. That's more important for us. And third, the message it sends across the border, across the country, that yes, India is prepared under this dynamic leadership to deploy its capacity to ensure its own physical security and ontological security. That's very important. And when you look at this again, read all the statement of right from Prime Ministers, foreign ministers, you don't find they claiming that these many citizens of Pakistan are being killed. Every official statement say these many terrorists may have been killed or were killed. That's a huge difference. So this entire episode also shows the international community's support for India. Like there are few critics from a university who kept berating this government for not doing much. Foreign policy is a big flop. Somebody sitting in France says it's a big tamasa. Somebody saying the NDA government, NDA2 government foreign policy is all sound and fury, which is signifying everything, achieving nothing. What concrete achievement do they expect? Really, I wonder. Look at the message, right? For the first time, the Chinese government came under tremendous pressure from the international community to lift the ban hold on Azhar, the internationally known terrorist living in Pakistan. Never happened in the past. Look at this. Not a single country issued any condemnation against India, even if it is a violation of the airspace of Pakistan. Instead, all of them came around supporting India. That shows where India stands. And 5 years time is this government has achieved anything, whether it is in terms of the value of your passport, in terms of economic growth, in terms of the popularity of the cultural products, in terms of leadership quality, in terms of enhancing the India's image and identity globally through its foreign policy as an instrument, I think is a huge, huge success, even though much of things which have been undertaken are still incomplete and more to be done on this. God willing, if this party comes back to the power again, whatever left incomplete in course of time would be accomplished perfectly. Thank you all for attending.